Hi, it is John Chen here at Engaging Virtual Happy Hour, and happy Friday. You made it to another Friday in a pandemic. If you can't tell, summer has officially arrived in Seattle because I don't think we have seen the sun since January or maybe even last year. And so, yes, it has finally arrived. We're excited to see that, and I'm like this close to going on actual some vacation. So excited for all the things that are happening in the next coming weeks. So, in this happy hour, I met this gentleman. He had a program called hashtag No More Bad Zoom, and that's enough for me to say, oh, I want to see what's up with that. I got a chance to be a guest on his show. Now he gets to be a guest on mine. So with that, his latest version of music that he is enjoying is called Lo-Fi. So let me give you the Lo-Fi version of Blinding Lights while I bring in the one and only Robbie Samuels. I love the chill vibe for that. That's Blinding Lights by Owl H. So hi Robbie, what's going on?
Hey, thanks for inviting me to be on.
So thank you so much. Let's just start off with the easy ones. For my friends who don't know who Robbie Samuels are, say a little bit about who you are and, of course, what you do.
So prior to the pandemic, I spent over a decade working to be recognized as a networking expert. That included a talk that I did for over 10 years. I launched a podcast on the topic of networking. My first book is about networking at conferences, a group coaching program, a TEDx talk. So I was poised to be an overnight success 10 years in the making until March 2020, when nobody needed any of the things that I had built skills and recognition around. So I had to figure out how to show up and add value. And the process led me to hosting my first virtual happy hour on March 13th, 2020. And I had no intention to turn this into a business, but short story is that led to several new revenue streams. And I became an event design consultant and an executive Zoom producer. And I work with mission-driven organizations to help them strategically bring their events online with less stress and greater participant engagement. I'm also a business growth strategy coach, which is partly the secret of my success, is that I was treating myself like a client. And I help my clients, particularly entrepreneurial women in their 50s and beyond, grow their impacted income through new revenue streams by helping them create likely prospect lists from their existing network. So that is what I've been up to in the last dozen or so years.
Well, I know what a day, especially for women issues. So actually, I'd like to actually dig into a little bit of like women over 50 finding networking pieces, right? I'm curious how you kind of got into that audience and maybe like what's one or two really key tips that you find really help this audience.
Yeah. Well, the short answer is they found me, and it took me a long time. And I finally figured out that was what was happening, and I paid attention. So it's really important to sometimes take a step back and take note of who's interacting with your content, asking questions, hitting reply. It's like my podcast audience, people who hit reply to my weekly emails. I was running some pilots. It's who showed up for that. I was having trouble selling the second version of a group coaching program after the pilot. I had lots of interest in the sales page and a lot of people emailing me about other things I could help them with, but not this offer. And when I finally stepped back and had some help to realize it was all these entrepreneur women over 50. And I think the reason why is that they have a ton of expertise.
Mhm.
They have a lot they want to offer. They want to make an impact. They want the results to happen sooner rather than later. And there's a way in which they're a novice, like the technology or the marketing, something about what they're now trying to do takes them outside of their comfort zone. And my solution is one that's really appealing to them. My solution is to create a prospect list from your existing network and then have conversations, research calls to discover what exactly people need help with and whether it's urgent enough that they'd be willing to pay for that solution. And to do all that building of an audience before you try selling anything, which is the opposite of, just throwing things up and paying money to get Facebook ads and, so all that good stuff. So that's the work that I do one-on-one. I also, that's the topic of my second book that came out at the end of last year, Small List, Big Results. It's all about my process and really detailed steps. And you folks can go to smalllistbigresults.com to get the workbook and all the toolkit and video and everything else I'm giving away for free there.
Wow. Thanks, Robbie, for that. I think I bet there's a couple factors that I'm thinking about that. Is that number one, it's so much easier to sell to somebody you know than to sell to like random strangers, right? And maybe this aspect of having the relationship be the key part of the beginning of a sale. I think is maybe easier. It's obviously easier than trying to go out cold, right? There's nothing.
Well, it's actually that you don't yet know. You think you're the expert, and you think you know exactly what people need, but you might be selling a solution that's way up here, and people are thinking about the problem down here. I
Yeah.
call this little p versus big P problem thinking. And so if you're not aware of the bigger problem, and if I'm trying to sell you surgery, and you're still debating whether you want a band-aid, it's a mismatch, and I'm not actually talking to you, and you know that. So having these conversations with people who already have that know, like, trust, and really listening to what people say will help you uncover the problems people know they have that they're willing to admit they're actually looking for a solution for, versus people mentioning things there's no urgency, or it's just they're not really even thinking about this at all. I mean, I think sometimes we think things are more urgent for people than they actually are, and they're not going to pay for it. There might be something else that is taking precedence that we should find out about. Maybe that's what we need to help them with first. So it's just really useful.
Yeah.
And it builds a runway for our ideas. And we either find people who want to work with us for that pilot, or people who would be willing to spread the word as referral partners. So it can be done in 6 to 12 weeks and save you a year and a half banging your head against a brick wall.
Oh, I like brick walls. We just bang some heads around. No, speaking of runway, talk about your runway to like in-person networking to virtual networking and, either like successes or challenges that you had along the way.
I mean, 2020 was really busy. I didn't expect 2020 to be busy. Basically March 2020, my business, it closed. Like, all of it was focusing on in-person events. My first book is Croissants versus Bagels: Strategic, Effective, and Inclusive Networking at Conferences. The at part of that sentence was no longer relevant. My TEDx talk was about networking at conferences. So it really was a question that week of trying to figure out how to show up and add value. I wrote 9 ways to network in a pandemic, and that was Thursday the 12th, and that led to Friday the 13th is when I did the first happy hour. Pretty quickly, I had people filling out my calendar asking me to pick, can I pick your brain? You seem like you know something about Zoom. Can you help my team? Can you help me with this? And so I started scheduling all these calls, and at the time I had nothing else going on really. I had this like part-time gig where I was coaching on behalf of a company. But other than that, I didn't have a lot going on. And so I realized, though, that because I was coaching at the time, that I would never tell a client of mine to just take a bunch of social calls. It feels like you're being busy and you're making a difference, but so I turned those calls into research calls. They were
Yeah.
inbound. I didn't have to go seeking them out, but I basically used that to figure out what people really needed. And 1 month later, April 14th, I think, I announced a 4-week pilot of a program called the 5% Advantage Program, which helps people become more confident and competent using Zoom and online facilitation and virtual event design. And 15 people, $500 a piece, signed up, did it very quickly, realized I loved it. It was going to be great. Ran it 4 months in a row with no breaks, which means I was constantly delivering and lining people up for it. Had no mention on my website until after the second full program. And during the third month is when it became a certification program. And about 2 dozen people have been certified. More, dozens more have gone through. And it's optional, but it was a very like clear, you have to meet 10 of these 12 criteria. And it was so people can really, it's not just like a checklist, but they needed to know these skills. They had to actually do videos and prove it. The experiential learning was so helpful. And that led to companies starting to ask if I could come and just produce their virtual events. And so by August, I had a whole bunch of clients lined up doing that. And I tend to work with these mission-driven organizations, which is my passion.
Mm-hmm.
And so California WIC Association and Feeding America is my biggest client. And, just different like healthcare organizations, associations, mission-driven organizations. And I love it. And I'm helping them think strategically about how to create community, because events are about content and connection, which is really the mantra that I was espousing back in the day. It's why we get on planes. And then when we couldn't do that, we had to figure out how to do that in an online format.
So talk to me about that moment though. You went basically from my whole business got destroyed, all right, to writing something, like doing something. Because that moment, right, that moment is to me is like the world's biggest pause. Like the whole
Oh,
planet paused for like a month or two.
I
And
didn't. I didn't pause. I think that there's also a really interesting divide between the people who kept going and hit the gas and people who hit the brake. And I said 6 months from now, we're going to really know the difference and how that has worked for people. Um, I mean, I think that when I think about when I think about this, like I felt stuck. It was Monday the 9th, and I accepted this was happening. I was like, okay, this is happening. I've been watching Rachel Maddow, so I had seen this coming for a couple of months. And on Wednesday, the 11th, I met with my peer mastermind. And I was like, I feel really stuck. I don't know what to do. What is next? And they kicked me in the butt. And they, really made the point that networking is not something that only happens at events, and that I already knew that. And I had built a global network in 5 years. And so why don't I just go help people do that? And that led to me writing 9 Ways to Network in a Pandemic. I shared it on Thursday. And the reason my event is on Fridays at 5 Eastern is because I got the idea at 8 p.m. on Thursday. And Fridays at 5 was the first time it seemed reasonable to host a happy hour. And I invited some people to come Thursday night, and they said yes. And so Friday, about 3 hours before, I was like, I better tell people. And I went and posted it around the internet, did the dumb thing of posting my Zoom link everywhere. It's like writing your phone number on the bathroom wall and being surprised people prank you.
you got all sorts of guests.
Fortunately, I didn't have Zoom bombers at that time. 20 people came. And you know what I discovered, though? This is the thing that really shifted, because I had, one of my ideas was to host a virtual happy hour that was on my list of 9, right? And I remember just looking at the list and being like, which one should I do? I love hosting dinners and gatherings. Definitely a big part of who I am.
Yeah.
I didn't realize at the time that I had all of these skills around online facilitation because I'd been on Zoom for years. I had been coaching. I had been doing group programs. I had been doing masterminds. I had been a participant in a mastermind. I'd been trained to do masterminds. So I had a lot of that already in my head. So even though it was 20 people and the format was everyone go around and say something for 2 minutes, people loved it because they knew who was coming up next. I muted and unmuted people correctly. I gave people instructions. At the time, I didn't know I had access to breakout rooms. I had never looked at the Zoom settings. I never looked into the hood. A week later is when I finally opened up the hood and I started playing around with breakout rooms. And so to think about this, John, I went from on the 13th, host something. People are like, this is great. I'm like, I'll never do that format again. I mean, it was nice, but that's boring. And then the 20th, I open up breakout rooms. And 3 weeks later, I sell 15 people into a $500 each program. And then 2 weeks after that, I start delivering it, and I do it for 4 months in a row. You know what happened? I was hosting a weekly event, and I was just learning nonstop. I would ask people to write in chat their questions, send them off to a breakout room, and then look up answers.
And then answer them when they came back?
Yeah, I would look up on Zoom.us, YouTube, and Google, and I would just create like a little cheat sheet. And I would say something like, earlier, John asked about blah, blah, blah. So top level, here's some things to think about. And if you want to know more, here's a link. Drop it in. And people were like, oh, it's so helpful. I mean, that's what I did until I actually knew more than most people in the room. But the first few weeks, that was just, I know how to use Google. I'm willing to test things out. And then we would just get people doing Q&A after we did all these breakout rooms. And so, and I got to play every week to figure out what worked, right? That also really helped. But I took on this other role for this coaching that I was doing. They asked me to oversee 120 students going through an online course about how to launch an online course. Mm-hmm. Very meta. It turned out to be a full-time job. Like it was an easily 45-hour week just to do that. Plus I had a dozen coaching clients through them. And then all of a sudden, that summer, my business starts taking off. The fall, I'm basically just holding on. I took off Father's Day and Thanksgiving in 2020. And Thanksgiving doesn't count because it doesn't end in Y. So, but I just
your
worked.
your principle of fail faster though is really something that I mean I definitely advocate. And for those, because I mean, I talked to other speakers. There were some speakers who just like they looked at it and they were like, "Well, I can't speak in person. I'm just going to take 6 months off." And all they did was fall behind.
Right.
When they came back on, they like everybody who was on like jumped light years ahead of them. And
You know what I think about the fail faster in that moment? Nobody was paying attention to anyone but themselves. It was the most freeing time to try things out and fail
yeah, yes,
because nobody was going to fault you. No one was going to look sideways at you. No one was going to like, why would you do that? And if you figured out something even a little bit and you then shared that knowledge with other people, they were
yes,
so happy. They were like so grateful.
yes.
So it was that community building of inviting people in who wanted to figure it out together. And fast forward to middle of 2021, I realized that we had enough money saved for a down payment. This like far off pipe dream of buying a house suddenly became a reality. And in 6 weeks, we
Aw,
like packed up and moved and bought 7 weeks later after we moved, we bought this house and moved in. So it
congrats.
just, the like my 2020 revenue was my best year. And then I 2.7x that the following year. So so it's been like hold on. And that's why my second book, people asked me, how did you do that? Which is why I wrote my second book around how do you build an audience before you try to sell anything.
Hmm.
And so, I had been writing that book a few years earlier and I dusted it off and decided to publish it. I had to do some work on it, but more or less.
Well, bravo with that. I know that you had some thoughts already about intentional design beforehand, and now you got 2 years under your belt. So, talk to me about what are you thinking about in what are you doing now to help design virtual meetings that you learned from the last couple of years?
Yeah, I mean, purpose first design is so key. We talk a lot about just Zoom fatigue, right? And I think it comes down to a lack of design, which is just no planning really, and poor execution. So a lack of design would be a presentation followed by Q&A, 45 minutes of death by PowerPoint followed by Q&A and no one moderating chat. So that would be what happened before the pandemic, but it doesn't make sense to have that model now. And so that the first part is like, how are you thinking about engagement? Are you going to have breakout rooms or polls, et cetera? And then the second part would be execution. So do you know, like if you're going to say, look in the top right corner for the three dots, do you do this and then confuse people, or do you do this and they get it, right? So that's design. That's execution. Or I remember I've had people say, go to raise your hand in chat. That doesn't make sense. Like there's never been a raised hand in chat. Or they say, go down here and click on participants and it's here, right? So, or vice versa, or react, or they say click on reactions and they say, so it's just like these little things that throw people off. And that's part of the Zoom fatigue. And now what I'm stepping up in sort of the next level of the conversation is don't just do engagement in a checkbox kind of way. Like we had breakout rooms, that's engagement. Because we also know that if people are thrown into a room together with either not a great question or too many questions, no one knows who's going first. They don't remember what the question even was. They have no idea how much time is left because there's no countdown clock up here. Somebody's going to start talking. So is that engagement? Yes. But if one or two people talk the entire time, it's probably the people with the most privilege in the room, the most seniority, the loudest voices. It's going to leave behind people of color, younger people, newer people, right? Just people who maybe don't know if they've quite fit in and belong. And so I want to think more about intentional engagement, because if the outcome of the event is that you want people to take a certain action or feel a certain way, well, then we should design with all of that in mind. So that's the direction that I'm now going with my clients when we're talking about engagement is, understanding the platform, understanding your purpose, and then designing with that in mind.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, those are all the factors. Like you can get engagement and you still might be getting the wrong thing based upon your goals. If you even know what your goal is,
Right.
So I think you told me that you're adding this new step. So obviously we're advocates of rehearsals. So like we're all going to meet together. We're going to go through the program and do things beforehand. But I think you're saying you're adding a new part here even before that. Like you have the meeting owner and you're really starting to work on that design then.
Yeah.
Can you share a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So one of my clients is Feeding America, and I'm grateful because I've had to do so much great work in supporting. They basically facilitate the work of all these food banks around the country, helping this network of food banks do better work. And that's what's interesting is that March 9th, 2020, as soon as I accepted that this was happening, the pandemic, I immediately went and started making a monthly gift to my local food bank. And I basically was like, I know we're going to be fine, but I know there are people going to, like, the need's going to go up. And how it's kind of nice that somehow I ended up, the universe basically was like, great. Now, months later, you get to work with Feeding America for a few years. So they've been wonderful. So what they do is they assign a session owner, sometimes one, sometimes two people who are, that's the meeting, that's the owner of that particular session. And I meet with that person to help them think about the purpose of this, the design, the flow, and then they go and figure out the speakers to fill in. If I'm working with a speaker directly, because a lot of my friends are professional speakers, it might mean I meet with them to help them design the session. So it's a design and strategy session, not a rehearsal. If it could be before you even figure out exactly who the speakers are, because sometimes once you know the design, now you know which speakers would be best because you know what stories you're trying to tell. And then another part of this is me coaching them on like a panel. I mean, in person or online, a really common thing is that you have, too many people on a panel. You have 5 people. Every single person has to do a 5-minute introduction of themselves, and they're all sitting up on stage and all in spotlight. And then every single person is asked the same question each time. So like the facilitator basically says, okay, here's my next question. And then everybody has to, oh my gosh, I'm bored out of my mind. This is not interesting at all. So I talk to them about how do you do the prep work to know exactly what stories each person has. And then the first question goes to a specific person. I'll say panelist A, and they get 5 minutes. And then panelist B gets 2 minutes as a follow-up. Second question goes to panelist C. Panelist A gets a follow-up. Panelist B gets the next question and then a follow-up. And they all know each other's things. They all know what stories to focus on.
Yeah.
And it, from my perspective as a participant, I'm watching a conversation happen.
Yeah.
Way more engaging, focusing on the right stories. And if it's a short intro, like honestly, another piece is that they don't even have to say anything about themselves. If you do a good credibility introduction, you can do it in a minute.
Yeah.
It's basically like, why do I want to listen to John? It's like, John is blank and he works at blank and he's going to talk about blank. His experience, he's going to talk about all of his experience with blank. Like, and that's, you don't need a lot more than that. And if you do, then don't have everyone sitting up there if you want each person to have 5 minutes, because what I have found is people have a really hard time on a panel paying attention when it's not their turn. And no one wants to watch a panelist zone out. Like I've seen panelists writing their own remarks. I've seen them on their phone, virtually and in person. I've seen this problem. So like thinking through, does it make sense to have them all up? Should we instead do a fireside chat? So it's just me and John talking on something. We don't have to have a panel. Maybe it's me and 2 people kind of illustrating something, like just being more creative about what are we trying to get to? And if we're trying to get people like, so purpose first design, are you moving them from thinking one thing to thinking another, from feeling one thing to feeling another, or from doing one thing to doing another? If it's a doing, if you want them to take an action, think about what objections people have about taking that action. What's their resistance about? What's getting in their way? Then find panelists or speakers or people to talk in an interview who will speak to those objections.
Yeah.
Like, to see how you design with that in mind, now you have the right people. And then you build in time for people to take reflection. So, okay, we just heard from the panel. We're about to move to questions. Before we do, take a moment to write down and this is the thing, it doesn't have to be in chat. Like, let people use paper and pen. Write down your takeaways and note your questions. We're now moving to Q&A. We're going to give you a minute to do that. Okay, just so that people can capture their takeaways. Then at the end, say like, okay, when in the next 2 weeks are you going to have time to review these notes and put them into practice? Are you going to reach out to someone in this group? Are you going to like schedule a call? Like, what's your next step? How are you going to make this actionable? So just really, I don't know, like in inclusive in engagement and intentional engagement, making sure people know how to show up. It's just, I don't know, it's multi-layered, but it's really important.
Well, I'll share a couple things around here. I mean, I learned the terms manels and wannels, right, in the past couple of years. Manels are all male panels, wannels are like white panels. And so,
Mal, pal, and stale is what my friend Bobby, she calls it.
what's the last one?
Mal, pal, and stale.
What's the last one stand?
Stale. Just mal, pal, and stale. Like it's they're it's just all white men of kind of older white men.
So one form, I love the taking a moment before questions, because there are even still conferences or sessions that I'm facilitating where even though we tell people about questions all the times, they're still and some of them are even business owners, they're still shy about asking questions when they have access to these amazing people and they don't do that. So I think
Right.
taking that moment, I think is a really part. Um, so I think the other part too, have you heard of an unpanel?
I mean, I've run on conferences.
So an unpanel was invented by one of my friends who was sick of panels, and so basically all he did was took a panel and he gave a 1 minute timer for anyone to answer. And
Oh,
so
interesting.
it was really I gotten a chance to test it out myself. I saw it and then I got to run it in two other formats. One of them
Yeah.
was the Microsoft alumni audience too, and it worked really well there. So we did run a timer, right? So like a timer is shorter than this one, and what was great about it is that we coached to the speakers to let them know it was going to be short, and most of them got it. Like one person went over in rehearsal, and then they're like, "Oh, I get it." So in 60, we coach them and we tell them get your best piece of information out first,
Exactly.
so you don't get cut off. And what we were able to do, like in a 30-minute panel, we actually answered 43 questions. So
How do
what
you get people to tell questions? And I guess you had to have the questions queued up because people sometimes take a while to ask their question too.
No,
I
the
mean,
question, there were pre-questions and then there were
yeah.
things that we took from the audience. So we recovered either way, but I thought that unpanel format, what was great about it was is that people stayed engaged, right? But just from the sheer volume, and if they started answering a question you didn't care about, you just had to wait a minute and then something else was going to happen. So,
I just want going back to this intentional engagement though. If we don't have good design and good facilitation, somebody is going to get the microphone, right? But it's going to privilege certain people, and certain people are not going to feel welcomed. They're not going to feel engaged. So I want people to not just be invited to attend. I want them to feel welcomed once they come. And there's a couple of things I like doing. One is one question for a breakout, not three. The question shouldn't be, tell me about a challenge you're facing, because then everyone's going to want to help the person who goes first. But it could be, tell me about a challenge you experienced and how you overcame it, because we'll still hear about challenges. But we'll get to hear about your resilience and some solutions, and no one will feel like they have to rescue you. Giving instructions about who goes first. I've seen people get kind of cutesy, and I've done some cutesy things, but now my rule would be first name or last name alphabetically, reverse first name or reverse last name alphabetically, because it's all on the screen. There's no question. We know exactly. People will know before they go in whether they're likely to be one of the first. And then also demonstrate an answer. So I would give a prompt for the breakout room question, and then I'll give my reply, or I'll pick someone from the group ahead of time who will give their reply. And the reason for this is that as we tell that story, it inspires other people's brains to think of their own story. And you've had this happen. You'll go home and you'll say to a spouse or a family member, how was your day? And as they start telling you their story, you think of all these things you want to interrupt and tell them, because your brain, is sort of ignited by stories. Stories beget stories. So then putting the question or the prompt into the chat and letting people know when you get to the room, if you want to know what the question was, just click on chat again. It'll open it back up. Setting the clock so we know exactly how much time there is left. Having have the timer run out and have only 15 seconds at the end. If you put 60, it's sort of the digital version of Walkward. I thought it was ending, and suddenly I'm now still in a conversation. Do I keep going? Just make it really clear. So these are things that I'm an outgoing extrovert, so I'm probably the person who's going to grab the mic, right? But I actually appreciate a well-facilitated, well-designed session, because then I can be a participant and not worry about whether everyone else is getting airtime. I know exactly the rules of the road, but my wife's a shy extrovert and she'll like it because she knows exactly what the structure is, when it's going to be her turn. She doesn't have to try to grab the mic from the two people who are always talking. So, it's just that kind of thing. And then for debriefs after breakout rooms, switch it up. It shouldn't be the same one every time. And the debrief should match what the purpose of that breakout room was. So like I've done a breakout where it's, if you had free time, what would you want to learn? And then people go off and have that conversation, which is a great way for people to find common and uncommon connections. But then when they come back, I'll say, okay, everyone, don't hit enter, but I want you to give you 30 seconds to write what it is you wanted to learn, a word, a phrase, a sentence. Okay, you got 30 seconds, 15 seconds. And then I'm like, okay, now everyone all together hit enter. And I call this the waterfall debrief. So the suddenly everything fills up. But what's cool is then you can say, okay, everyone take a minute and review what you saw in chat, and that tell people if you can help them. So I've had people partner around learning German, giving tips on how they learned guitar, all kinds of great stuff. That debrief is good. But then another one after like wins, having people share personal, professional wins, ask for a nomination in chat rather than asking people to raise their hand. Because self-selection, who would self-nominate? Oh, the people with the most privilege. But if you ask for a nomination, then you're going to end up elevating stories that somebody else thought was worth other people hearing. And you can get nominations of people who are brand new, like first day, and they get picked for the main stage. Everyone should hear there. We all get to applaud. And then sometimes I might do, okay, who here took a lot of notes in the breakout rooms on that last topic? Raise your hand, use the raise hand feature under reactions. And if you took a lot of notes, and then just like mention something, like if you can mention 1 to 3 of your takeaways. So yet again, we're giving the microphone to somebody who maybe wouldn't have thought to be the one who uses the mic. And then sometimes you just like, if this pertains to you, use the raise hand function, right? So there's all these different ways, and then making sure people know who's coming up next and readying them to be unmuted, like just giving people a heads up, because we're not sitting in a row. Like, yeah, I don't know who's next. I can't see whose hand is raised, all that stuff. So just like in person, we would make it really clear, okay, we're going to go in this order. Or, I mean, oh my gosh, John, people at the end of their talk saying, okay, if anyone has any questions, go ahead and unmute. I'm like, in person, you would never say, go ahead and just start talking. They'd be like, all right, we're going to do questions now. They'd either say like, queue up at the mic, raise your hands, turn in your index card with your question, right? Like, it wouldn't be like a free for all. So I mean,
at the same time. Yeah. Right.
Like, oh, and even with panels. So a question comes in and it's not directed at anyone in particular. The moderator needs to say, that's a good question for John. John, like they need to be someone who's trafficking like the question, or else then everyone hesitates and then everyone unmutes at the same time. And then there's like, oh no, avoid all of that. This is about good design, and it lets more people more fully show up. It's going to help with your retention of your events. People are going to want to come back. They're going to help refer your events. All free, by the way. I mean, you can spend some time with me doing design. That's not free, but like the actual doing this is not expensive. It's just thoughtful.
It's not buying any new piece of technology. That's what the most pieces about running a great and engaging virtual meeting, a lot of them are free if you learn how to do them. And your stories beget stories. I gotta share one piece with you. Right?
I have to just tell you, you and I are so different around tech. I bought this and I still haven't plugged it in.
I have 4 of them now. I have like 60 plus buttons that do stuff like this.
I bought this in January of this year. I had a very particular reason for buying it, and then decided I didn't need it and decided to do something different. And I have not plugged in my Stream Deck.
It's definitely, I wanted to do a story begets story because I have a great story about feeding America for you. Are you ready?
Yeah.
Okay, here in Seattle, there's a very high-end restaurant known as Canlis, and it has been passed down through 4 generations. And Canlis has shown some of the best creativity in the pandemic. Like, they are a fine dining 4-star restaurant, and they shut down and they created a drive-through at one time, right? They were just trying to do crazy, amazing stuff. And so one of them was that they created a take-home dinner service, or a take-home delivery, right? So they would make this amazing high-end dinner. It was kind of expensive, but you would get it. It would come with some instructions. You put it in there, and you would have this really, really nice meal made by somebody else, by top chefs, not you. And so, anyways, they accidentally sent an email to everybody who was a customer that night about the instructions that you had to put it in the oven for 350, and somebody replied all and said,
Oh.
how is it that a meal that I'm paying this extra amount of dollars for, that I have to reheat at my house, right? And so it kind of turned into this thing. This other person came back in and goes, well, if you have these kind of high quality problems in your life, I suggest you make a donation to Feeding America with your next set of money like that. And what happened afterwards is that they raised $10,000, right? Because everyone else said, that's a good idea. I'm going to do that too, right? They raised $10,000 for Feeding
Yeah,
America, right? And Canlis matched all the money that
that's awesome.
that went to Feeding America. Donna's going to chime in. Donna's got one question for you before we close up. Hi, Donna. How are you?
Hey,
I'm
Donna.
well. How are you guys?
Great.
Good, good. Enjoying the outdoors here. Robbie, fascinating. Love hearing your story, and you have a very soothing pattern of speech, so it's very easy to relax on a Friday afternoon for that. So I was kind of curious of if you could share one of your success stories. You said you had started listening to people who are asking the questions. Well, what questions were they asking that made you chime in and think, hey, this is what I should be doing?
And Donna, I think, is really interested in this 50 plus women.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, I can give you, I can give you two examples. One, Donna, is I had someone when I was trying to sell that coaching program, and people were reaching out to me for everything but the coaching program. Someone I knew who was 58 at the time. She was an executive career coach with a full roster of clients and had been doing it for 18 years. And she wanted to launch a podcast, and she knew that was something that she needed some help for doing. So that's, first of all, a problem she had that she was willing to admit. That's something we have to notice, because sometimes there's also a problem you have that you're not willing to admit. And then there's a problem you have that you have no idea you have, but the expert knows you have. And I can't sell anything for that because you don't know you have this problem yet. So I helped her realize she actually needed the coaching program because it wasn't just about a podcast. It was about how the thing that she wasn't willing to admit but right away was that she wanted to work less, have time off, eventually have a book and a group coaching program. And that 10 years from now, she wanted to still be working, but she wanted to be able to design her life differently. She's 58, doesn't plan to slow down anytime soon. Her friends are starting to talk about retirement, not what she's interested in, but she does want to design her life differently. So that we did that in the first 6 months. She reduced her client hours by 20%, had 2 half days to start working on the podcast, doubled her fees, got really clear on who she didn't want to work with, created a referral network to send those people to other referrals, let those referrals know exactly who her ideal client was, started to actually get those ideal clients, which is what allowed her to charge the different kind of money. Then the podcast got launched. It's been actually won a couple of awards in the last 2 years. Then the book came out. The book included stories from the podcast, right? And then the group coaching program. And so, like, she's now 63 and designing the life, right? She's got that all in play now. And that's the kind of journey that I help people go on. And it's not exclusively women, although it tends to be over 50, not exclusively. It's just that you're at a point where there's some urgency. If you're 58, you're not going to say what a 32-year-old once said to me, I'll just figure it out on my own. You know, like, you don't have time to spend 4 years banging your head on projects. Like, she wouldn't have gotten all these things happening in 5 years if she had done that. So that's an example of the kind of people I work with. And then for the pandemic, people, like, I knew a mix of speakers and then also what I'll call sort of meeting professionals, and also some like virtual assistant admin people who were trying to figure out how to retool in the middle of this pandemic. And so the program ended up being for both those communities. It was a mixture of speakers and meeting professionals, which was awesome because the meeting professionals wanted to then be Zoom producers and the meeting professionals got to do that. And the speakers got to figure out, I don't actually want to be in charge of the whole experience. I do need someone helping with some tech. So that helped people understand their roles. But it also means that speakers often get brought in and they're the ones having to teach the tech to a company, especially back then. So the company will be like, oh yeah, we've got someone who's gonna like, well, no. Here's how we're gonna handle Q&A. Here's how we're gonna handle chat. Are these settings set up? Just like going into Marriott to present, you would have to make sure you asked for a projector. Because if you showed up at Marriott and said, I was gonna have slides, but I forgot to check if there was a projector, that's a real rookie mistake. But in the beginning of the pandemic, people were coming in on other people's Zoom links, going to press the breakout rooms button, and it wasn't there. Or I like to use the green check mark and the red X, the nonverbal feedback, and like I'll go to someone else's thing and it's not there. So I have a checklist. It's at robbiesamuels.com/Zoom settings. It goes free. It's not even behind an email link. It's just a free PDF with a video that walks you through how to make all these adjustments. The one that's not on there that I want to mention is captions. So if you go to robbiesamuels.com/captions, you can get free transcripts and captions on Zoom, which is incredibly helpful for so many reasons. But these are the things that people just needed to know how to do and feel better about charging money in this new environment. And many of the people I became certified virtual event professionals launched Zoom producing companies, and I subcontract to them for my clients when I have 2 or more concurrent sessions. So it's helped me create more bench strength.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Thanks for asking.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Donna. All right, Robbie, last piece. If you wanted people to remember just one thing from this program, what's the one thing you want them to remember?
Purpose first design. Like, what are people going to think, feel, or do differently at the end of your program? And how will you measure that? How will you know during the session, 6 weeks later, 6 months later, that you're on the right track? And then being just that thoughtful design, so that you're not just doing 45 minutes of death by PowerPoint followed by ineffectual Q&A and no one moderating chat. We're past that.
Well, I love it. I can't wait to see future designs from you and future success stories.
Hey, have folks come hang out with me. First Friday of every month, nomoorebadzoom.com. We have fun. We hang out, we network, and we talk about all kinds of things under Q&A.
I've been there. You should definitely check it out. What I do love too is to find different people's versions of virtual meetings. And again, if you attend enough of them, you're going to pick 1 or 2 things up from every place that you go. Because these people, again, you get the refinement of all the different things that they tried. These are the things that they know, love, and believe in. So thank you so much.
Thanks for having me on. Thanks, John. Thanks, Donna.
All right, this is John Chen. Hey, have a great beginning of the summer. It's coming up. Stay safe. Look for purpose-driven design. I definitely like that. Think about that one piece. We also revisited one of the top keynotes this week, and it just goes to show it's like, redesign something, right? Try something new and look to see what works with people. And you'll find that quite often it's not technology. Quite often it's a people thing. So with that, we'll see you next time. And I'll see you after I do some recreation. See you next time.
Always start people and keep people. Show you got heart.